you know, and do this jab, 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 and
You're doing it with the wrong hand, honey.
Oh, well, I'm left-handed.
Yeah, well, you jab with this hand.
So jab, 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 and then you do
Throw a right cross. Okay.
a right cross. So I said, let me try. So Ed's standing there with his hands. You're supposed to punch into his hands. So I went jab, 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 and boom, and I punched him right in the stomach. You know, I understand what he means by body. It was such a good feeling. I mean, I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't even realize I was doing it. But this feeling of boom right into somebody's stomach, I have to say I loved it. Really, I understand the heady power that somebody feels, and you have to be very careful with that.
When you're young and poor, sometimes the only way to get out is to fight your way out.
But you have to fight by the rules. Tonight in our prime time segment, Judith Levy tells us about a prime timer who did just that. Judith.
Right, Reg and Julie. This prime timer went from rags to riches with his fists. In 1948,
It was 1943.
Ed Gersh won the Golden Gloves Championship. Today, the 65-year-old prime timer still comes out of his corner to help young boxers. He remembers when he was a poor kid trying to get started.
It was tough to earn a living in those days and to get the money to go car fare and lunch money and so forth. So if I can help him today, I'd like to help him.
Stepping into the ring isn't for everyone. Boxing is a sport that takes discipline and dedication. Keep your hands up. Step in with your left foot. Look out for that left hook coming at you. Ed tells young boxers all the work's worth it for that one special moment.
When you're in the Madison Square Garden and they shine that light on you and only you, and there are 20,000 people looking at you, and then when you win, those 20,000 people are cheering and yelling. It's a great, great feeling.
Prime timers like Ed Gersh may be helping future Olympic athletes and boxing champions.
Individual instruction. He tells the boys to keep their hands in their proper position. Elbows in close to the body, chin tucked in close to the left shoulder. And that goes for you too, Bud. Remember, elbows, chin.
This is the left jab. Notice how fast it's thrown with the arm returning to the same position. Now let's try the right cross. Catch your opponent off guard and it's a haymaker. Notice the power in this punch. The entire body is behind it. Now the left hook. Unlike the jab, which is a light punch, this is thrown with power. Joe Louis's best punch, by the way. Now the uppercut. Made famous by Bob Fitzsimmons, it's designed to come up under your adversary's defense. You aim for the solar plexus. Jab, cross, hook, uppercut. Now a barrage of all blows. You have to learn to mix them up to keep your opponent off guard. And so it goes. Punch, block, counter, punch, block, counter. You're in the ring and you know how to handle yourself. You're a fighter and you know one thing. As long as you're able to defend yourself, you'll always stand on your own 2 feet.
that person back there was a young, ambitious, hardworking young man who had aspirations to be what I've become today. My wife says I look better now than I did then.
I met him at his daughter's house, and she said to me, you know, my father is only interested in boxing. And I remember thinking, I don't think so. Because he was pretty sexy.
I was born March 6th, 1920, and my mother left my father a short time after that. I never remember living with my mother and my natural father. My stepfather never worked, and my mother supported the family. And the reason we moved so many times is because the people whose houses we lived in wanted to rent. So when they got very obstinate about demanding the rent, we moved. And that's the way my early life was. My earliest recollection is living in Monticello with my mother alone in a place where they had boarders and everybody had their own bedroom, and you shared the kitchen and the bathroom with other families. But then she met my stepfather, Henry Gersh, and they set up housekeeping, and they moved into another apartment together with me. And we lived there for several years, and I started school there. In the 3rd grade, I wound up in Ellenville, and I was there until about the 8th grade. The 8th grade, we moved to New York, and I went to a junior high school in New York, where I met 4 other boys my age, and we got to be very good friends, and then we got to be blood brothers. And a blood brother is one where you would cut your wrist, and one of the other fellows would cut their wrist, and you would mix their blood, and you would mix your blood together. And in that way, you became a blood brother. And I had 4 other blood brothers, 2 of which were killed in the war. They were both, one was an Army ace. He shot down over 5 German planes, and then he got killed flying. And the other one was in the Marine Air Corps, and he was shot down over one of the islands in Japan. The other 2 and I remained friends for the rest of our lives, and we were in contact until the day they died, and I went to their funerals. And now I'm the only one left. As a young boy, I never picked on other children, but if somebody would pick on me, I'd stand right up to them and fight. And I had many, many fights. I was a southpaw, and kids weren't accustomed to fighting southpaws, so I always had the advantage, and I won almost all of the fights that I was ever in. My father used to complain that I always liked the rough sports, which is true. I used to play Johnny on a Pony or Ringalivio, or those are all kid games that involve body contact. And I always liked body contact all my life. And now, even now, but I don't like it with boys anymore. I went on to high school, and I went to DeWitt Clinton. And when I was in DeWitt Clinton, I met a fellow by the name of Bill Gladstone, who I became very close with. And he was the one that started me in boxing. Also, he started me in football. I went out for the football team, but nobody ever looked at me, so I quit in disgust, because I knew I was good. And but he continued, and he played football this year. And the following year, he said, "Come on, Eddie, you have to go out for the team." So I went out for the team, and the following year I made it. And I was an all-scholastic tackle from DeWitt Clinton High School, which was quite an honor, and which enabled me to get a college scholarship. was down at George Washington University for 6 months. And then I left George Washington University because they gave us 2 meals a day. And if you didn't have money to buy the third meal, you went hungry. And I went hungry for a good portion of the time. And you know, if you go to bed hungry every night, it's not conducive to studying, and it's not conducive to a way of living that you would like to achieve. So I left George Washington University, and I came back to New York, and I enrolled at New York with all borrowed money, hoping to get a scholarship. I worked through the summer, and next fall I went out for the football team, and I did very well. And they granted me a scholarship right then and there. They said that I wouldn't have to pay for my next year's tuition, and I got the letter from the dean giving me the scholarship. And as luck would have it, we were scrimmaging West Point, and I got clipped from behind and the side, and I tore all the cartilages in my knee. I tried playing football again, but I couldn't play. And NYU was really a great school in that they continued my scholarship, even though I couldn't play. I was always a rough kid and a kid that liked physical activity, and I missed the one-on-one competition that you get in football, the body contact. And I met a friend of mine who I had gone all through high school with. We had played high school football together, and he was wearing a brand new watch. And I saw his watch, and I said, Bill, where'd you get that? And he said, I got it boxing. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, if you go down to Jamaica Arena, every Friday night they have amateur fights. And if you fight, if you win, you get a $15 watch. If you lose, you get a $10 watch. But in either event, you get a watch. So I said, hey, that's for me. And I went down to the Jamaica Arena, and I saw somebody down there and spoke to a man, and he says, did you ever fight before? And I said, no, but I was a football player in good condition, and I like body contact. So he said, where do you live? And at the time, I was living up in the Bronx. So he said, well, there's a gym on 149th Street and 3rd Avenue called Bobby Gleason's Gym. He said, why don't you go up there? There's a man by the name of Larry Kent who trains amateur boxers. See Larry Kent and train for a couple of weeks and then come back. So I went to Bobby Gleason's gym, and I met this Larry Kent, and I told him I wanted to be a fighter. And he told me to come back the next day with a pair of shorts and gym shoes, and he would look me over. So I came back the next day, and he kept me in the gym for about a year before he let me go out to fight. One of the things Lolly Kent, my trainer, told me was that I was never supposed to box with anybody unless he was there. And there were 2 brothers who had won the Golden Gloves the year that I started boxing. And they were coming up to the gym, and they would ask me to box all the time, but Larry would never let me box with them because they had a lot more experience than I did. So one day Larry wasn't there, and I said, oh, the heck with it. They kept asking me, and I decided that I was going to box them. And this fellow just beat the living daylights out of me. He pummeled me from corner to corner, and we boxed two or three rounds, I don't remember, but he beat the living daylights out of me. And my face was all bloody. And so, you know, I learned a lesson that I should do what my trainer says. After that, I started winning, and I won several fights. And but I was training every day in Gleason's gym, And a year later, luck would have it, but the Jackson brothers came up to the gym again, and they asked me to box. And this time, I said, sure. And I started boxing with them. Well, they didn't realize that they hadn't been up at the gym for a whole year, and they didn't realize how much I had matured and how much I learned and how much I had progressed. And we started boxing, and it was a heyday for me. I beat the living daylights out of them. Whatever they did to me, I did it back to him in spades. And after it was over, he said, gee, you got pretty good. One night I was at Jamaica Arena fighting again, and with another amateur. And we come out and we start fighting, and we're doing pretty well. All of a sudden, he hits me in the nose. I think it was in the second round, and he broke my nose. My nose went all the way over to the side, and blood started pouring out. But in those days, if you didn't quit, the referee would never stop the fight. So I come back to my corner, and my trainer grabs a hold of my nose, and he snaps it. And I heard that clunk, and it goes back into place. He puts cotton up my nose, pats me on the back of my head, and says, you're winning the fight. Go ahead, keep it up. So I go out there, and I fought the next 3 rounds. There was the cotton came out of my nose very soon. As soon as you get in there, you know, and you breathe out through your nose, and the cotton came out, and the blood was all over me, all over my opponent, all over the referee, all over the ring. But I kept fighting, and I won the fight. I always say that a fight is won or lost in the morning on the road, meaning that if you really do your road work, you'll win the fight. But if you don't do it as well as you should, then chances are, if the other fellow is doing it, he's going to win. You get up in the morning and you run, and normally that takes about 2 hours from start to finish. When you get to the place where you run, and then you run for anywhere from 3 to 5 miles is what you should do. And after that, you come back and you take an alcohol rub down, and then you get dressed for your day's activities. In my case, it was either going to school or teaching as a student teacher in a high school. And after that, you went to the gym at about 3 o'clock or 2:30, and you stayed in the gym for at least 2 hours. And then you showered, and again, in my case, I'd go home and study and get up to run again the next day. The first fight I had in the Golden Gloves was with a big sailor by the name of Jimmy White. Jimmy White was the previous year champion, and everyone in boxing who knew boxing and knew amateur fighters anticipated that this White and I would meet for the championship in the Garden because they felt we would beat everybody else and that he and I would meet for the championship. Well, as it turned out, we drew each other for the first fight in the gloves. He was about 205 pounds and I was 185, so he was quite a bit bigger than I was. And we start fighting, and we're boxing, and all of a sudden, tremendous lights. I see 1,000,000 stars. And then I heard a tremendous roar. And then I heard the referee say, 2, 3, 4, 5. Actually, he was shouting all the time, but I heard the first numbers as if he were whispering. My first thought was, where are you, Eddie? You're sitting down What are you doing sitting down? You're supposed to be fighting. Oh, you got knocked down. Okay, take a count. Taking a count means that you stay on one knee until the count of 9, and then you get up. So I got up, and the referee brushes off your gloves, and I keep the referee between me and my opponent to give me another couple of seconds, and then we start fighting again. And at the end of the 3rd round, I had him up against the ropes with his hands down, and I was going boom, 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 and the bell rang. But if the fight had continued for another 10 or 15 seconds, I would have knocked him out. In any event, I won the fight and went on to win the championship. I had gone through all of the competition and beaten all of the other heavyweights, and this was now the Tournament of Champions, where the champions from every city on the eastern seaboard would send their champions to Madison Square Garden. My fight was the final fight of the evening because it was for the heavyweight open championship of the Golden Gloves. It was about 11 o'clock when my fight was to start. They blacked out the entire garden, and the spotlight shone on me as I left the dressing room, and I walked down the aisle toward the ring, and the spotlight follows me all the way down to the ring. When I got into the ring, another spotlight focused on my opponent and followed him all the way down into the ring. When he got into the ring, the house lights went up, and the referee called us both into the center of the ring to give us our instructions. Well, he did that, and the bell rang, and we started fighting. And while we were fighting, my uncle, who had come to the fight, was sitting up in the bleachers. He was going crazy, and he was punching, he was yelling and screaming, and he was hitting the people on both sides of him, yelling for me. Finally, one of the people sitting next to him says, "Take it easy, will you? Take it easy." He says, I can't. That's my nephew fighting down there." So the fellow says, "Which one?" And that's a true story, so help me God. The fight went to a decision, and I won the fight, and I won the championship. I was the only Jewish person to win the heavyweight open Tournament of Champions in the Golden Gloves. He was just a wonderful fighter. He was a wonderful human being and a great person. He was just one of the most outstanding people you would ever meet in your life. I don't have many idols in my life, but he was one. I had enlisted in the Army Reserve, and after the Golden Gloves, I was called to active duty, and I was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where I became a boxing instructor. And this enabled me to keep in shape and hone my skills a little bit more. After I was discharged from the Army, I went back to school and I started fighting professionally. I had 5 professional fights, and I did pretty well. I was going to graduate school, working on my master's, and fighting professionally at the same time. And people in school must have thought I was crazy, because every now and then I would come in with a black eye or a cut eye or bruises over my face, and here I'm a graduate student with other graduate students, and I look like some street bum. But after a while, they found out why I looked the way I did, and they used to come to the fights and root for me. Boxing is the most difficult sport and profession in the world. There is nothing more difficult than fighting. And in order to be good, you've got to be completely dedicated. I didn't have the amount of the degree of coordination that Sugar Ray Robinson had, or Joe Louis, or Sugar Ray Leonard. But what I lacked in coordination, I made up in determination. And I won some of my fights. When I would go into a fight, I'd say, I'm going to win this fight because I'm not going to lose it. And, but I wasn't great. I was good, but I wasn't great. And I realized it. And teaching was a lot easier, so I chose it. My first teaching job was in a junior high school in East Harlem on 109th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenue, named Galvani Junior High School. And the first day I went into the school, it was toward the end of the term. When I came in, the principal said to me, Mr. Gersh, I have a class on the 5th floor. It's a 9th grade graduating class. Do you think you'll be able to do that? And I smiled and said, sure I can. And he said, okay, and he gave me the keys, and he told me to go up to the classroom. Well, I went up to the 5th floor. I opened the classroom door, and the boys are walking around the hall with their hats on and yelling and shouting, and I'm standing in the doorway, and they're saying in front of me, shall we cut? No, we got a new sub. Let's see what he's like. So they decided that they would see what I was like. And they all came filing into the room. I closed the door, and they have their hats on. They're walking up and down the aisles. They're yelling. They're screaming. And finally, I let that go on for maybe a minute. And I said, in a very high-pitched tone, now, boys, I want you to sit down and shut up, because if you don't sit down, I'm going to knock you down. Well, that completely stunned them, and for about 10 seconds, there was absolute silence. And when I had that silence, I said, now, is there anybody in this class that knows how to fight? Well, now I got their attention. And they were all pointing to the one boy. So I said, okay, you, come up here. And I asked that boy to come to the front of the room. And I said, now, I want you other boys to sit down. So I really got their attention. And I'm talking about fighting, which is their cup of tea. So they all sit down. And I asked the boy to come up to the front of the room, and he comes up to the front of the room. And I said, now, if you were going to have a fight with somebody, how would you hit him? So he swings, and I say, well, okay. And I take off my glasses, and I take off my wristwatch, and I take off my jacket. And I said, now, if you were going to have a fight with me, I want you to show me how you would hit me. Hit me on the shoulder the way you would hit if you're going to fight with somebody. So he goes, boom, and he hits me on the shoulder. And I said, oh, come on, you can do better than that. You wouldn't hit somebody that easy, would you? So then he hits me a little harder. And the class is, they're all watching, and they're absolutely silent. They don't know what's happening. And then finally he hits me hard on the shoulder. And I said, now you see the way he did that? He didn't do it right. This is the way you're supposed to do it. Boom! And I hit him with a right hand, right on the shoulder. He falls back up against the blackboard, up against the door. It was kind of in a corner, and he comes staggering forward. And I said, now, that's the way you're supposed to throw a right hand. And that's the way you're supposed to hit somebody if you're having a fight with them. Now, I want you to sit down, and I want you boys to take off your hats, and I don't want to hear a sound out of you. We're going to be talking about, I'm going to give you some lessons on boxing, And if you want to ask a question, you've got to raise your hand, and when I call on you, I want you to stand up and ask your question. Otherwise, I'm going to ask you to come up here, and I will teach you how to throw a right hand. They got the message pretty quickly, and I put my jacket back on, and I was sitting down at the corner of the desk, and I passed around the golden gloves for them to see, and I also had a picture of Joe Louis, who was a heavyweight champion of the world at the time, with me together, and I passed that around to the class, and they were just eating it up. They were so thrilled to see those things. And then they started asking me questions about boxing, and I made them raise their hand. If they didn't raise their hand, I wouldn't call on them. And the principal comes up to see what I was doing, and he's standing there on his tiptoes looking into the room. He sees everybody seated, nobody had a hat on, children raising their hands. He walks into the room, he couldn't believe what he saw. And then at the end of the day, he says, "Mr. Gersh, would you like to work here full time?" After I started teaching, the principal realized that how good I was at controlling a class and how the children in my class listened to me. So a couple of weeks after I was there, he comes to me and he says, "Mr. Gersh, I have a boy in the 7th grade and his teacher can't control him, and I'm wondering if you would be willing to take him into your class." And I said, "Sure, I'd love to have him." So he sends me Wilfred Aveles, a boy who was about 12 years old, the biggest boy in the 7th grade. But while he was in my class, he was a good boy. And for the full year that I was with the 7th grade class, he behaved himself. However, when Wilfred wasn't in my class or he wasn't with me, he started carrying on. And one day a boy comes up to me and says, "Mr. Gersh, Wilfred took my lunch money." And I said, "Okay," and I call Wilfred up. And he comes up and I say, "Wilfred, I know you took this boy's lunch money. I don't want you to do it again." So he says, "Okay." A couple of weeks later, another boy comes up to me and says, "Mr. Gersh, Wilfred took my lunch money." So I call Wilfred up and I said, "Wilfred, this is the second time I'm telling you I don't want you to take another boy's money." I said, "The next time you do it, I'm going to send you to the youth house." He says, all right. And of course, he does it a third time. So I call the police. He goes down to youth court and he's sent upstate to the New York State Reformatory for Boys. We'll continue with that story for another time because we have other stories to... We'll get back to Wilfred later. I'm sitting at my desk in the office one day, and a cleaning lady comes running upstairs, and she says, "Mr. Gersh, they're beating up Mr. Moskowitz downstairs." So I jump up from my desk. I jump up from my desk, and I start running downstairs. In the meantime, the principal was behind me because his office was right near mine, and he heard the same thing. I come running downstairs, and I see one fellow with his arm around the teacher's neck and pulling the teacher backwards like that. And then there's another fellow standing there swinging at the teacher while he's being pulled back off balance. So I come down there, and I hit the fellow who had his arms around the teacher's neck with a left hook right on the jaw, and he goes down. And then I turn around to the other fellow, and I hit him with a right hand and a couple of other punches, and I had him up against the wall. And at that moment, the principal came down, and he saw me with this fellow up against the wall, and he says, "Weiter Mole, which is a Jewish expression meaning again. So I go boom, and I throw a right hand at him, and he just turned his head aside. I grazed his head, and my hand hit the wall, and I cut my hand a little bit, but I really didn't hurt it because by the time it hit the wall, it was well past his head, and the force of the punch had been expanded. So we take the two fellows up to the office, and we call the police. And while we're waiting for the police to come, Mr. Flack says to me, "Eddie, go into the nurse's office and wash off your hand," because my hand was a little bloody. So one of the fellows who I had hit a couple of times said, "I want to go to the nurse too," because his face was all bloody. So Mr. Flack says, "Eddie, take him into the nurse's office with you." And I made a mistake that time that I never made again in my entire career in East Harlem. And that is, I walked out of the office, the principal's office and my office, going to the nurse's office, which was down the corridor, and I let him walk behind me. So as soon as we get out of the office, there's an exit there, and he goes down the stairs, and I go down the stairs after him. He goes out the front door of the school, and I'm out the front doors with him. That's on 109th Street. He goes up to 3rd Avenue and 109th Street, and I'm running behind him yelling, "Stop thief! Stop thief!" And he goes down on 109th Street and 3rd Avenue. He goes down 3rd Avenue to 106th Street. And I'm going behind him yelling, "Stop thief! Stop thief!" And all the people are watching us go by, and nobody is calling the police. He goes out to Lexington Avenue. He makes a right turn on 3rd Avenue on 106th to Lexington Avenue, and I'm behind him. "Stop thief! Stop thief!" We get out to Lexington Avenue, and there was a big dump truck stopped at the red light, and he jumps on the truck. The light turns green, and the truck driver starts driving away, and I'm yelling, "Stop thief! Stop thief!" Boom! The truck stops. And I run over to the truck, and meantime, this fellow's reaching around in the truck for something, some object to come down with, and the truck driver comes out of the truck, and he says, "Get out of there, you SOB!" And so he comes out, and I grab him when he comes out, and I put one arm behind his back like that, and I'm marching him back to the school. And he opens his mouth to me, and I say, boom! I hit him across the face, and I say, "I don't want to hear one word out of you." And we keep, "Mr. Gersh," boom! I hit him again. And we keep walking down the street. And in the meantime, there are hundreds of people around watching this going on. And I'm marching him back to the school. Every time he opened his mouth, I hit him across the face with the heel of my hand, and I hit him pretty hard until he got the idea that I had to keep quiet. So I bring him back into the school. In the meantime, the office was crowded with police. And we bring him in, and we press charges against him. And when they went downtown with him, we found out that he was on probation for a stolen car and carrying a gun charge. We'll go back to Wilfred. Wilfred, after he stole for the 3rd time and went to the youth house, he was sent to the New York State Training School for Boys until he was 16.
I developed myself, I got healthy, you know? That was good, I got that out of it.
And as I indicated before, he started corresponding with me, telling me that he wanted to be a fighter.
I was impressed that he was a prize fighter, which I wanted to be. So he treated me the way that I would have liked my father to treat me, which was an absence in my life.
And finally, he came out of jail at 16, and he comes into school to see me before he even went home. And he told me he wanted to be a fighter. So I got him a job as a dishwasher with a friend of mine on 50th Street and Broadway and a ham and eggery. And I got him a trainer in the gym, and I paid his gym dues and so forth, and he started training. He was looking pretty good, and he was doing pretty well learning to box. And about a year went by while this was happening. And then I get a call from him. He was in the Tombs. And I go down to the Tombs to see him. He was about 18 at this time. And I said, I'm talking to him through the glass partitions, and I say, what happened, Wilfred? And he says, well, they accused me of mugging somebody. And I said, did you do it? And he says, yes.
I used to hang out in this bar with this girl. She would go and she will attract the trick of the John into the hallway. Then I would go in the hallway and boom, one shot and he's out. Take the money, keep on stepping.
He pleaded guilty, and they sent him away for a sentence that is described as zip to 5. In other words, for good behavior, he could get out at almost any time, but if he didn't, he would have to serve 5 years. And Wilfred served the full 5 years. We'll get back to Wilfred later. So I had one of my monitors sitting opposite my desk on a bench, and I give him a note and I say, bring Knight to me. Knight was the name of a student. So he goes out and I'm working at my desk, busy with paperwork, and then I look up and I see my monitor sitting at the on the bench. And I said, I thought I told you to get Knight. He says, you did, but he wouldn't come. I said, what do you mean he wouldn't come? He says, he wouldn't come, Mr. Gersh. I said, did you tell him I wanted him? He said, yes. And what did he say? I can't tell you. I said, what do you mean you can't tell me? He said, I can't tell you what he said. I said, you tell me what he said. He said, all right. He says, tell Gersh to go to hell and kiss my ass. So I said, is that what he said? He said, yes. I said, okay. And I was busy, and I let it go. A few days later, I'm walking through the halls, and who do I see but Knight? I grab Knight by the shoulder, I say, come with me. And I take him into a bathroom that only the principal and I had the key to. I close the door, take off my glasses, take off my wristwatch, put my glasses in my breast pocket, put my wristwatch in my coat pocket, hang up my coat, and I go up to him, and in the meantime, he's in the corner. And I said, did you tell Gersh to go to hell and kiss your ass? He says, Mr. Gersh, I never told you to go to hell. Well, I stood there for a second, and I started laughing. I broke up. It was just impossible for me to stop laughing. In the meantime, he's looking up at me, and he doesn't understand why I'm laughing so much. And then I said, all right. And I put on my jacket, I put on my glasses, and I put on my wristwatch, and I go to class. Well, this boy, years afterward, would always come back to school. He'd see me at one end of the hall, he'd be at the other end of the hall, he'd yell, hey, Mr. Gersh, I never told you to go to hell. End of story. Wilfred had finished his zip to 5, doing his full 5 years at Dannemora. And the last 2 weeks of the 5 he spent in solitary because the guards knew that they couldn't control him, so and they couldn't extend his sentence, and they didn't trust him in the general population, so they kept him in solitary. He was the toughest guy in the whole prison. He was the king of the prison. First day he came out, he came into school to see me. At this time, he had no place to live, so I took him to my home, and I gave him the den where which had a bed, and he slept in the den. And he would come to school with me every day. He would come to school with me, and I got him a job working as a custodian in a school. And he would come to school with me in the morning. He would go to work in the school in the afternoon, and then after that, he would go up to the gym from 3 to 5 while I went to another part-time job that I had. And then at 5 o'clock I would pick him up and take him out to Long Island. And we would both have dinner, and then he would watch television and go to bed. And the next day he would get up and run early in the morning and then have breakfast and go to school with me and work in school. And in the meantime, he was going to the gym every afternoon and learning how to fight, and he got to be very good. He was known as a cape man because he wore a cape and he carried a cane. And one of the boys in school comes up to me and he says, "Mr. Gersh, the cape man stole my lunch money." So I go out looking for the cape man and I don't see him. Another day, a couple of days later, another boy, "Mr. Gersh, the cape man stole my money." Once again, I don't see him. Again, another time. And this continued for several weeks. One day, a boy comes to me and says, "Mr. Gersh, the cape man is in back of the school." Now, in the back of the school, there was the school building, a pathway, and a very high 8-foot chain link fence. So that if somebody was in that pathway, the only way he could get out of there was to go one end of the school or the other end of the school. That would be either the east end of the school or the west end of the school. But he could not get out of that pathway. So I say to Wilfred, "Wilfred, you go around the west end of the building, I'll go around the east end of the building, and we'll get him." So I go around the building, and way down, maybe a couple of 100 yards, the cape man sees me coming. So he sees me and he turns around and he starts running the other way. And then all of a sudden he sees Wilfred coming the other way. He takes one look at Wilfred and he figured I was easier than Wilfred, so he turns around and he starts running to me. And I was running toward him. And I grabbed him, I put him down on the ground, and I took his cane away from him. I opened the cane and there's a big sword inside the cane. And we press charges. I take him downtown to court, and the judge looks at the weapon and he says, "Who took this away from this boy?" And I said, "I did, Judge." He says, "Gee whiz." And he just shook his head. But that was the end of the cape man. When I was the dean there, I had a whole box load of what they call zip guns. They used to make zip guns in those days. But they were lethal. They would kill you. Just one bullet, right. I was sitting in my office one day, and again, the cleaning lady comes up and says to me, "Mr. Gersh, I think there's going to be a fight downstairs." So I go downstairs, and I see 4 fellas standing together, 2 on one side and 2 on the other side. And with all my years of experience now, I recognized immediately that there was a confrontation. 2 of the boys that were there were outsiders who were not students at the school, but they had graduated several years before. So I tell them both to come upstairs to the office. And they come upstairs to the office with me, and I go into the principal's office. He's sitting at his desk, and the first thing I ever do when we had outsiders was that I would search him. So I start searching this boy, and I go down his pants. I'm behind him. I go down his pants like that, and then I put my hands sideways, and he had a slash jacket on, and I put my hands inside the pockets of his jacket, and I felt something hard, which I recognized to be a gun, but it wasn't in his pocket. It was in his belt. So I throw a headlock on him, because I had my hands underneath his. I throw a headlock on him, and I yell to the principal, "He's got a gun." So Mr. Flax comes running out from behind his desk, pulls the gun out of the boy's belt, and he starts hitting him over the head with it. In the meantime, as soon as I yelled, "He's got a gun," the secretaries in the office call 911, and the report goes out to the police that a boy in school has a gun. Well, those cars started converging on the school with the sirens and the red lights, and the police come running up to the office with their guns drawn, and the secretary says, "It's safe now, you can go inside." She said that to the police. She was so excited, she didn't know what I was saying, so she says, "It's safe now, you can go inside." Oh, anyhow, the gun was a new model 22 repeater, that automatic, which was a very potent weapon. And the police came in and we pressed charges, and the boy was sent to the youth house. But after it was all over, I said, "Mr. Flax, why did you hit him over the head with a gun?" He says, "I don't know, I saw it in the movies." End of story. When I had the 7th grade class, I had 20 children in the class, and sometimes I had a few children absent. So I would take all the children, and I had a new car, a new Dodge at the time. I'd pile all 14 children in my car, and I'd take them up to my house in the Bronx and feed them frankfurters, and then take them back to school. That was just one of the things. Other times I would take them all over New York. I'd take them to the Statue of Liberty, and when my children were with me, they were good. They would get up to give their seats to ladies, and they behaved perfectly so that you could be proud of them. I taught in East Harlem for about 18 years, and I worked all this time for a man by the name of Flax, Israel Flax, who was just the most wonderful person you could ever meet in your life. He was kind, he was gentle, he was strong at times, he was understanding, he was extremely bright. He taught me more about life and human nature than any person in my whole life.
Ready? Okay! Marching through the hills all day, these Senecas work their butts all day. Climbing, swimming, painting too. The counselors work their butts up too. Lexi gives us piggyback. Stephanie has us all count off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We love West Hills!
Well, when I was about 30 some odd years old, I was invited to a party of DeWitt Clinton jocks, all fellas that were high school athletes. And Bill Gladstone was there, and he and I got into a heated argument. And finally he said to me, "Ed Gersh, you are a complete failure." He said, "When you went to high school, you were all scholastic tackle. When you went into boxing, you were a champion, national champion. You were a great ice skater. You were good at everything you ever did as far as athletics was concerned. But now, the way we judge people, you're a failure. We judge people by the amount of money that they are capable of earning. And you're a poor school teacher, and in my estimation, you're a complete failure." Well, I argued that I'm doing what I like, and I'm helping a lot of children and this and that. There was no resolution to the argument, but when I went home after that, and I slept on what he said to me, and I decided that he was right, that I considered myself now that I was an adult, that I was a failure. So I decided at that point that I was going to become a millionaire by the time I was 50.
So, did you leave teaching right away?
No, I didn't leave teaching. What happened was that there was another young man in the school that I became very good friends with by the name of Norman Schnittman. And Norman and I decided that we both wanted to earn more money and live a better style than our teaching profession allowed us to do. So we started looking for other ways to supplement our income. And he came upon the idea of starting a day camp. And we looked at properties that we felt would be good for a camp. And we had looked at many of the properties on Long Island, all of the big estates on Long Island, and we finally felt that the property in Huntington would be a good place to start a camp. There was a building on the property, and 13 acres of ground, which was almost completely wooded, and also had a very nice little pond on it. Well, we arranged for the purchase of the property, and we cleared the land, we built swimming pools, we built tennis courts, we really improved everything to the point where it was a very desirable place for children to spend the summer. When we started West Hills, we had about 169 children. We were very successful for the first year at West Hills Day Camp. And the following year, we started Crestwood Country Day School on Round Swamp Road in Huntington. And we had about 300 children for our second year. At that time, we took in another partner by the name of Dave Polanski, who was a basketball coach at City College and coached the basketball teams when Nat Holman retired. After having both camps for a few years, we started another camp in Woodbury called the Woodland Academy. We ran Woodland Academy as a school and camp for about 4 years. And while we were running Woodland Academy, we had many hundreds of children who would go from our day camps to a residential camp. So we thought that buying a residential camp would fit right in with our program. And we bought Camp Kent in Kent, Connecticut. Dave Polanski went up to Camp Kent, and he was the one that was responsible for operating Camp Kent. So we had West Hills Day Camp, we had Crestwood Country Day School, we had the Woodland Academy, and we had Camp Kent. And we were probably the largest private camping people in the country.
So I got a question. So were you a millionaire yet?
I wasn't a millionaire, but I was well on my way to becoming one.
Just from the income from the camps?
Just the income from the camps. But finally, after having the Woodland Academy for about 4 years and running it as a successful camp and school, a builder came to us with a proposition and a price that we couldn't refuse, and we sold it, and now it has become the Woodland Estates. The money that I received from the Woodland Academy, I invested in an apartment complex out in Stony Brook called the University Gardens, which had about 375 apartments and was probably one of the largest apartment complexes on Long Island at the time.
Had you ever done anything like that before?
I had never, my only experience with an apartment complex is that I had lived in one when I was a young boy, but I had no experience in operating it. However, I learned very quickly, and I spent day and night at University Gardens. When I bought University Gardens, the place was half filled. It had many vacant apartments, and the apartments that were occupied by prostitutes, by junkies, by people who had difficulty in paying their rent. And little by little, we got rid of all of the undesirable people, replaced them with students at Stony Brook University and other people whom you would be glad to have as your neighbors. And finally, we rented the entire complex to people who paid their rent and were good neighbors. After we sold the Woodland Academy, we continued our partnership for another couple of years. And it reached a point where we felt that we wanted to break up our partnership. Not that there was any argument or disagreement, but our lives had changed and our children were growing up, and we decided that Norman would own Crestwood, I would own West Hills, and Dave would own Camp Kent. And we had a very amicable agreement and broke up the partnership. And today, Norman Schnittman and I are the best of friends. He is my closest friend, and I love him dearly, and I know that he returns that affection. When Wilfred was very young, he was a great worker. He had learned some great work ethics in the prison, and he could work harder and longer and faster than any man I ever met in my life. Well, he helped me do a lot of the construction at West Hills. We were putting up fences. We were still building. And he was with me. He worked sometimes until 10 o'clock at night, but he was always there. he had such a nice personality, and he was so warm and outgoing that the women used to go crazy over him. As a matter of fact, he dated one of the counselors, a white girl, whom he married and had a child with, and named him Edward. And I was the godfather. I carried the kid home from the hospital. And today, Wilfred is in his 60s. He's not very well, but he lives in one of the houses that I own. He works at camp in the summertime, taking care of the children, teaching them how to fish. And he's a great, great counselor and a great person, a wonderful person who had some very bad things happen to him during his lifetime. New York Institute of Technology was a new school that was started in New York City and moved out to Long Island. And I obtained a job teaching history for 1 year, and the following year I was appointed as assistant dean. And I enjoyed working with those young men and women tremendously. They were great. And I met a man by the name of Donald Ross, who was the dean, and he wanted to start a college. And I thought it was a great idea and challenging to me, so I joined him, and together we started looking at properties to start a college. Donald Ross and I looked all over the Northeast for a site, and we found a site in Wilmington, Delaware, which was an old motel that had a gas station. And we took the motel and converted it to a dining room, and dormitories and classrooms, and the gas station turned into a fine library, and the college is now thriving with thousands of students. We started the college to cater to many of the young boys and girls who could not get into a college because their grades were not as high as they should be, number one. And number two, most of the colleges were filled with veterans who were returning from the Vietnamese War. So that it was very difficult for any young boy or girl to get into a college at that point. We took all of those young people and we gave them a place to learn.
He is weighing in at 134 1/4 pounds. This gentleman has a record of 18 wins, only 1 loss with 7 knockouts.
I went down to Puerto Rico and I met Wilfred down there, who was living in Puerto Rico at the time. And I have to bring you up to date on Wilfred, but he was living in Puerto Rico. He had just come out of jail. I think he did 7 years of a 15-year term, and he was training 2 fighters. So I met him, and he showed me the fighters, and I said, okay, let's take them back up to New York and see how good they are. So after my vacation was over, and I went back to Huntington, Long Island, where I was living at the time, I called Wilfred, or I wrote to him, and I sent him airplane tickets for himself and the 2 fighters and money to come to New York. When he came to New York, we met him at the airport, and I took him out to an apartment complex that I owned in Stony Brook, and got him an apartment with the 2 fighters and a car, and gave them food money so that he could train the fighters in a gym that was near the Huntington area. He was training the fighters, and I was supporting all 3 of them until the time came when I had them fight. And they really didn't have the kind of ability that I expected from them, or demanded or wanted from them. They both fought, they both lost, and they looked so bad that I sent them both back to Puerto Rico, but I kept Wilfred in New York. After I dropped those 2 fighters, I was looking around to manage some fighters, and Howard Davis Sr., the father of Howard Davis Jr., who was our Olympic champ in 1976, came to me and told me that his son was looking for a manager, and he asked me if I would manage him. I agreed to do that. So I straightened out all his bills, and I started giving him money every week to support himself and his family. and start training again. And he started training again. The first 6 months that I managed him, we had several fights, but he earned about $250,000. But after that, he got pretty cocky, and he signed a contract with a promoter without asking my advice or without discussing it with me at all. And because he did that, I ended my career of managing him. After I stopped managing Howard Davis, I managed a few dozen fighters, at least 2 or 3 dozen fighters. Probably the best fighters that I managed were Freddie Pendleton, who was a lightweight champion, and Darren Van Horn, who was a junior middleweight champion. I enjoyed myself very much. It was great fun, but it was very expensive fun, and I think I probably lost about $500,000 with all my fighters. A couple of months ago, Holly, my wife, came to me and said, you know, I'd like to help Cecilia, who was a lady who worked cleaning our houses. She told me that Cecilia was supposed to have received her green card, which she did not because the lady that she had worked for and who had promised to get her her green card had died. Holly came up with the idea. She says she needs to marry an American in order to get her green card. And she said, how about introducing Wilfred to her? And I said, well, Wilfred would like a new car, and if she would give him the money for a new car, he would be glad to marry her. So I discussed it with Wilfred, and he agreed. And then we gave Wilfred her telephone number, and they started talking over the telephone. Not only did they do that, but one day Wilfred comes into New York and meets Cecilia at our apartment and takes her out to dinner and to the movies, and then they came back, and one thing led to the other, and finally Wilfred is calling her every morning and she's calling him every night, and the two are become real lovey-dovey, and the first thing I know, they've fallen in love with each other, and Holly made a beautiful wedding for both of them at West Hills Day Camp, and they are two of the happiest people in the world, and we hope they live happily together for the rest of their lives. And this is my beautiful wife, and she is beautiful and lovely and smart and bright and artistic and intelligent. And this is another picture of her. This is when we first started going together, and I took her to her first boxing bout. I got a phone call. It was a Saturday night. I came home from a party, and the babysitter, I had, as I say, been divorced, and I had a daughter who was a young child at the time. And the babysitter said, Mr. Gersh called. I called him back the next morning, and I said, is this a decorating emergency? And he said, well, I'd like to take you out to breakfast. Anyway, we worked out that we would have a drink together that afternoon. And we started to chat, and we decided, I don't know, this is really off color. I don't know if we can put this on tape. I don't know about that, Holly. Well, we decided to have an affair. We knew each other for a long time. We just decided to skip the casual dating and go right to an affair. But he said to me, we have to set some ground rules. He said, I said, that's fine. And he said, the first ground rule is this isn't an exclusive relationship. We can each date who we want. And I said, that's terrific. The second ground rule was that he didn't want his children to know about it because he didn't tell me he was dating somebody else quite seriously. And I said, that's not a problem because I don't want my office to know about my dating a client.
He said the third ground rule is no falling in love. I said, not a problem. And he said, and the fourth ground rule is I am never getting married, so I want you to understand right from the get-go that I will never get married. And I said, that's great, because I would never marry you. You're much too old for me. And of course, as time went on, each ground rule fell. Here we are. 15 years later, you know, there's a big age difference between us, which I thought people would realize more, but obviously
It's getting smaller all the time.
Smaller all the time. You're making me old before my time, kid. And
I thought you were keeping me young.
well, I thought so too, but I keep looking in the mirror. I don't know. So.
We've had a good life together.
Yeah, we have.
Cut.
What do I say?
Anything you want. How do you like the camp?
I love it. West Hills has everything you need to have for a great summer.
I love being here. It's a great camp. It's beautiful.
We love West Hills!
Winning the Golden Gloves was a great thing for me, but bringing happiness to all of these children far surpasses anything that I've ever done before, I think.
You've worked here for how long?
32 years.
And what's it like?
And he's a great person to work for.
You work here for another 32?
Yeah, sure.
He's a great boss.
That's what everyone says.
And not because I'm, you filming me. It's, that's the way it is. Great guy. Very down to earth. So I wish I was his son.
I was only with my father for about 3 years of my life, 2 years of my life. But I was with Mr. Gersh for many more. If I would have listened to him 40 years ago, I would be a doctor now. Because this is the things that he put in my mind. He says, read a lot, he told me. Read a lot. Things like that. What else can I tell you?
I just want to ask you, do you wake up some mornings and think, how did I get here? This is
Many times, Larry, many times I do. I always wonder, never in my wildest dreams did I ever imagine that I would have 3 homes that are completely furnished with clothing in all 3 homes and a chauffeur-driven limousine that I have now, and also the cars, and I never dreamt that I would achieve this kind of lifestyle. And I never dreamt that I would marry such a wonderful woman as I'm married to today.
Here you are, 81 now?
81.
You're looking back on your life, what do you have to say? Or looking ahead to your life.
Well, looking back, I made lots of mistakes, but none that I'm really sorry for. And looking ahead, I'll probably make more mistakes. But I hope that I'm not really sorry for those either.
Keep your hands up. Don't come your hands up. Don't do this. Elbow comes up.